If you've ever been the dependable one, the problem solver, the person everyone calls before a crisis hits, then maybe you'll understand. I didn't start out trying to be the family backbone. I just kept saying yes, and somewhere along the line that became my job. Natalie, 30, Portland, finance, the one who always had it together. Or at least that's what they told me. When Mom lost her job, I picked up her rent. When Layla dropped out of school and decided she needed a fresh start, I helped her find an apartment, paid her deposit, and covered her first 3 months of bills. She said she'd pay me back. I said, "Don't worry about it." That was the beginning of the script I didn't know I was writing. Every time something went wrong, my phone rang, a flat tire, a bounced check, a surprise vet bill. I was the first call and the last resort. No one ever asked if I had enough. They just assumed I did, and for a long time I leaned into that role. I told myself it meant I was strong, that I was good, that this was love. They called me the rock. "You're always so solid," Mom would say. Layla would joke, "You're basically our walking emergency fund." I'd laugh, I'd pretend it didn't sting. Because deep down, I needed to believe that being useful meant I was loved, so I gave. Quietly, consistently, without conditions. And I never expected anything in return, until my body finally forced me to. It started small: headaches, trouble focusing, forgetting where I left things. Then I collapsed in the stairwell at work, blackout, hard fall, ambulance ride. I woke up in a white room with a doctor explaining things I already knew and didn't want to hear. Adrenal fatigue. System overload. "Your body," he said gently, "is shutting down from doing too much for too long." I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, wondering if I could still get Layla's rent in on time. I remember reaching for my phone. And I remember the text I sent, just 2 lines. "Hey, in the hospital. I collapsed at work, I'm okay. Just wanted you to know." I waited an hour, then another, no call. Layla saw it, read receipts don't lie. Mom replied sometime after midnight. "Hope you're okay. Will rent still go through tomorrow?" I stared at the message for a long time, like if I looked hard enough it might say something else. Something kind, something human, but all it said was what it meant. And something shifted inside me. Not loudly, not even sadly. Just quietly, like a door closing that no one noticed had been open. Because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't let myself face in years. I wasn't their daughter. I was their system, their fallback plan, their financial infrastructure. And when I went offline, they didn't panic. They rerouted. I thought that maybe being the strong one meant I was loved. But the truth was harsher than that. I was needed. And the second I couldn't deliver, they disappeared. I thought they'd call the next day. It wasn't that I expected some dramatic apology or teary voicemail. Just something, a check-in, a "how are you holding up?" Even a joke. But the silence that followed felt like walking into a room you used to love, only to realize the furniture's been rearranged, and no one told you. I kept checking my phone. I'd wake up, roll over, instinctively reach for it, only to see the same empty lock screen. No new messages, no missed calls, no Layla, no Mom, just silence. Cold and familiar in a way I hadn't wanted to admit. I told myself they were giving me space. Told myself they didn't want to bother me while I recovered. Told myself it was fine, that I needed quiet anyway. But the truth sat heavy in my stomach. They weren't waiting for me to get better. They were waiting to see if the money would still come. And it didn't. I'd already paused the automatic transfer to Mom's rent. I didn't Venmo Layla her weekly buffer like usual. I said nothing. And neither did they. At first, it felt like rebellion. Then it just felt sad. I wasn't punishing them. I was just tired. And the absence of any response made something very clear. I had trained them to see my love as a direct deposit. Once the payments stopped, so did the pretending. The strange part, my world didn't fall apart. My apartment was still there. My lights still worked. The earth kept spinning. The absence of them didn't collapse my life. It just made it quieter. I started noticing things I hadn't in a long time. The way the light shifted across my living room floor in the late afternoon. The sound of the neighbors' wind chimes. The small, invisible rituals of my day that had been drowned out by everyone else's emergencies. I cooked meals just for myself. Simple ones. Nothing fancy. Nothing Instagram-worthy. I didn't eat over the sink while texting Layla about overdraft fees. I sat at the table. I lit a candle once just because it smelled nice. I didn't explain it to anyone, and that's when the guilt started creeping in. Not loud. Not accusatory, just familiar. A quiet voice that asked, "Should you be doing this?" That wondered if maybe I was being cold, if maybe they were hurting and didn't know how to say so. That whispered, "What if they think you've stopped caring?" But another voice, newer, softer, rose to meet it. What if they already did? A week passed, then another, then a text from Layla. "Hey, just checking, are you still sending rent this week?" No greeting, no "how are you?" Not even a "hope you're doing better." Just a schedule, like nothing had changed, like I hadn't been in the hospital, like the last 2 weeks of silence never happened. I stared at the message, typed a few versions of a response. Deleted all of them. Finally I sent, "I can't help right now, I'm still recovering." She saw it, didn't reply. 2 days later another message. "So, is that like forever, or just this one time?" There it was, not even anger. Just confusion, like she couldn't imagine a world where I wasn't the safety net. Like the idea that I might not return to my post was somehow inconvenient, not heartbreaking. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words. But because, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. The world didn't end. No one showed up banging on my door. And the truth, as much as it hurt, was this. If my only value to them was financial, then maybe they were never family. Maybe I'd just been footing the bill for a performance I wasn't even allowed to star in. And now the stage was empty. And for once, I didn't mind the quiet. It took me 3 days to admit it wasn't just the money that stopped. It was me, the giving, the constant reaching, the autopilot sense of responsibility that had shaped nearly every decision I'd made since I turned 22 and got my first adult paycheck. After Layla's last text, the one that asked, "Is this forever or just this one time?" I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because I didn't want to explain myself anymore. For the first time, I wasn't interested in negotiating the price of my presence. I was tired, and I wanted to see what happened if I didn't fight the tiredness. What happened at first was nothing. No follow-ups, no missed calls. No dramatic attempts to pull me back in. Just absence. It was like I'd been turned off. Unplugged. Removed from the group thread in spirit if not in name. The silence should have been freeing, and it was, sort of, but it was also unfamiliar. Like walking around a house where the furniture had been rearranged overnight. So I tried to fill the quiet with little things. I cleaned my apartment slowly. Not out of obligation, but because it felt good to see the floor again. I cooked a full meal just for myself. Set a plate, poured a glass of water, sat at the table. No podcast, no music, just me and a sense of what is this? Ritual, peace, loneliness. I started noticing the sounds I'd forgotten. The low hum of the fridge, the clink of a fork on ceramic, the way my own breath slowed when no one needed anything from me. For years, every pause in my day had been filled with someone else's needs. Now, the pauses were empty. And at first, they echoed. I spent the next week doing what I can only describe as wandering through my own life. I read through old journals, deleted dozens of unread emails, unsubscribed from all the family discount apps I'd used to send groceries. I rearranged my kitchen cabinets and realized I had 3 boxes of tea I didn't even remember buying. I lit a candle that had sat unopened for months. And then one afternoon, I passed a boutique I'd walked by 100 times. Nothing extravagant, just one of those little shops with handmade mugs and linen aprons and notebooks with embossed quotes. Normally, I'd keep walking, tell myself it wasn't practical, that I didn't need anything in there, that every dollar should go to someone else's emergency, not my comfort. But that day, something in me paused. I stepped inside. It smelled like cedar and something sweet I couldn't name. There was soft music playing. And for a moment, it felt like I'd wandered into someone else's life, the kind of person who didn't feel guilty for liking beautiful things. I ran my fingers along the shelves. A mug caught my eye. Off-white, hand-thrown, with a little thumbprint near the handle. The kind of detail that meant someone made it slowly, deliberately. It cost $26. I stared at the price tag longer than I should have, not because I couldn't afford it, but because I wasn't used to giving myself permission. I almost walked out, almost talked myself out of it with the usual script. You could buy groceries with that. Mom might need help soon. Layla's birthday is coming up. But then I remembered, Layla didn't text on my birthday this year. Mom didn't call when I was in the hospital, and I had a kitchen full of groceries. What I didn't have was anything that felt like mine. So I bought the mug. No excuse. No justification. No apology. The woman behind the counter wrapped it in tissue and said, "Treat yourself." I smiled, and for once it wasn't tight or defensive. "Yeah," I said, "I guess I am." When I got home, I made tea. I didn't rush. Sat by the window, mug in hand, and let the sun hit my face. I didn't take a picture, didn't text anyone, didn't tell the story. I just let the moment belong to me. And that night, something cracked open. Not in a painful way. More like when you finally unclench a jaw you didn't know was tight. I stood in my kitchen, that new mug drying on the rack, and thought, maybe this is how it starts. Not with some grand declaration of independence, not with blocking numbers or writing letters I'd never send, but with one tiny thing I didn't have to earn. For so long, I believed I had to deserve joy. That peace was something I bought with service. That love was a trade. But here I was with no one applauding, no one watching, and I felt light. Not healed, not finished, but light enough to stay upright. And for the first time, that was enough. I didn't call it healing. Not at first. I called it cleaning, sorting, resetting. I didn't light sage or write affirmations in gold ink. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years and threw away broken chargers, expired coupons, nail polish that belonged to a version of me who thought glitter could cover exhaustion. It started with a cabinet. One afternoon, I was looking for a spoon and ended up pulling the whole drawer out. It stuck a little on the left side. Always had. I'd just gotten used to it. I sat on the floor, the contents dumped around me. Spatulas, takeout menus, 3 pairs of scissors for some reason. And I thought, how many things in my life are stuck like this? Working well enough just because I never made time to fix them, so I cleaned that drawer, took my time, wiped down the base, threw out what I didn't need, put the rest back in neatly. It slid smoothly when I was done. That feeling. It was ridiculous how satisfying it was. But it made me wonder, what else in my life had I learned to work around instead of actually confronting? I opened the closet next. Inside were years of compromises. Business clothes that never quite fit. Dresses I bought to blend in at weddings I paid for but didn't enjoy. A pile of sweatshirts I'd inherited from Layla because she didn't like the color anymore. I held up each one, asking questions I'd never asked. Do I like this? Do I feel like myself in it? Does it belong to who I'm becoming or to who I was trying to please? I ended up with 3 bags of donations. I didn't tell anyone. I just took them down to the shelter and left them with a smile. Not performative, just clean. I walked out feeling lighter. Like I'd been living inside a house with too many ghosts in the fabric. I kept going. I made a budget not for crisis, not for covering Layla's overdraft or mom's electric bill. Just for me. Rent, food, small joys, therapy, coffee, an emergency fund I renamed in my banking app, just in case I matter. I wasn't sure if I'd ever touch it, but it felt good to name it. Then I built a weekly schedule, not a planner full of checkboxes, just a rhythm, mornings for slow starts, afternoons for work, evenings for cooking and walks, Sundays for no one. I even blocked time off for things like do nothing and wrote it in pen like I meant it. And I meant it. Because what I was realizing, slowly, awkwardly, was that I'd spent years reacting. Spinning, fixing, tending. And I'd never really built a life. I'd built a system around everyone else's needs. Now, with the noise gone, I could finally ask the question, what does a life built around me even look like? I wasn't trying to become someone new. I was trying to return to the parts of me that had been buried beneath urgency. I'd always loved quiet mornings, warm food, well-placed words. But I'd traded them for usefulness, for approval, for being the person people could rely on, even when it broke me. That week, I moved my furniture around. It sounds silly, but it felt huge. I shifted my bed so it caught the morning light, moved my desk near the window, took down the photos I'd framed because they looked responsible, and replaced them with prints I found at a flea market, messy, abstract, a little weird. Like me maybe. I bought a small plant, gave it a name, sat with it while I drank my tea, and for once I didn't feel like I needed to be anywhere else. The first person to notice was the barista down the street. She said, "You look different. Rested, maybe." I laughed and told her it was the mug. She didn't get it, but I did. I hadn't heard from Mom or Layla since the last message. No, just checking in. No, can we talk? No guilt, no noise. And while a part of me still waited for that message, still imagined a version of this story where they showed up with softness, I wasn't holding my breath anymore. Because I was beginning to understand something no one had ever taught me. Love doesn't grow in sacrifice, it grows in space, in truth, in choice. And for the first time I was choosing me, not loudly, not dramatically, but deliberately. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. I still flinched when the phone buzzed, still wondered if choosing myself made me selfish. But I was beginning to trust the quiet, to see it not as punishment, but as possibility. And slowly, drawer by drawer, hour by hour, I was building something. Not a fortress, not a mask, a home. It started with a knock I almost ignored. I just sat down with a cup of tea, my new favorite lavender blend, and a book I wasn't sure I even liked, but liked that it slowed me down. The knock wasn't urgent, just 2 short taps on the doorframe. I thought maybe it was a delivery. But when I opened the door, it was Jake, the maintenance guy from the building. He looked a little awkward, like he wasn't sure if he should be standing there. "Sorry to bug you," he said, lifting a wrench slightly. "Just checking on the mailbox panel. One of the screws came loose again." I nodded. "Oh, right. Yeah, it's been squeaking." He smiled. "I figured. You didn't put in a request, but figured I'd take a look." I let him in. He crouched near the entrance, fixing the panel with a kind of quiet competence that made me unexpectedly grateful. Not because I couldn't fix it myself, but because it was nice, having something small taken care of that I didn't have to manage. When he finished, he stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and asked, "You doing okay?" It was such a simple question, but it stopped me. Not "you need anything." Not "are you back at work?" Just "okay." I hesitated, then said the most honest thing I'd said out loud in weeks. "I think so, maybe." Still figuring it out. He nodded like that answer made perfect sense. "Yeah, it shows." I tilted my head. "Shows?" He gestured vaguely around the apartment. "It's different in here, lighter." I looked around. The new plant on the windowsill. The art print with the strange blue brushstroke. The mug resting on the counter, still half full of tea. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy, but it was mine, and maybe that showed. "Thanks," I said and meant it. He lingered a second longer, then added, "That tea smells good." I smiled. "Lavender mint, you want a cup?" He blinked like he hadn't expected the offer, then shrugged. "Sure, if you're offering." I made 2 cups and we sat on the edge of my couch like people who weren't sure what kind of story they were in. We talked about nothing. Music, dogs, how he used to work in carpentry before switching to building maintenance. He didn't ask questions that dipped into the personal, didn't probe or overshare, just existed, kindly, patiently, like someone who didn't expect anything in return, and something about that settled me in a way I didn't know I needed. For so long, every relationship I had came with invisible terms. I'd grown used to people measuring me by what I could offer, how quickly I could respond, how well I could smooth out chaos that wasn't mine. Even silence came at a cost, because the moment I stopped showing up with solutions, people stopped showing up for me. But here now, with this stranger sitting across from me and steam rising between our mugs, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not alone, not needed, just seen. He didn't stay long. When he stood to leave, he gave me a small nod and said, "You're doing all right, keep going." Then he left without ceremony or expectation. I sat there for a while after, staring at the door. Not because I wanted him to come back, but because for once, someone had come into my space, seen me, and didn't try to take anything with them when they left. That night, I wrote in my journal, not about my family, not about guilt, not about Layla's texts I still hadn't answered. I wrote about the color of the afternoon sun, the quiet presence of a mug placed gently on a table, the way lavender smells different when you're calm, the sound of someone saying, "You're doing all right," and meaning it, without making you prove anything. I didn't realize how starved I was for kindness without a transaction attached to it. That was the night I stopped saying, "I'm fine," in my head, not because I wasn't struggling, but because I was, for the first time, starting to feel something steadier than fine. Not happiness, not healing, just wholeness. Quiet, unremarkable wholeness. And maybe that was more than enough. The invitation came as a text from my mom. It was short, polite in that way only family can manage when pretending everything's fine. "Dinner at mine this Sunday. Layla will be there, hope you can come." No context. No "how have you been?" Just a line tossed out like it hadn't been weeks since I'd stopped answering, since the money stopped moving, since silence had become our primary language. I read the message 3 times before I replied, "Okay, I'll come." I didn't feel pressure. I didn't feel dread, either. I just felt ready, not in a dramatic, movie-ending kind of way, but in the quiet sense that comes when you realize you're no longer afraid of the thing that used to break you. Sunday came, overcast and cold. I wore a sweater I loved, not fancy, just comfortable. Something that made me feel like myself, not the version of me they preferred, professional, pressed, prepared to pick up the tab. I brought nothing. Not wine, not dessert, not the usual last-minute groceries or takeout because mom didn't have time to cook. I brought only myself, and that, I decided, was finally enough. Mom opened the door with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Layla was already at the table, flipping through her phone. It looked exactly the same chipped mug next to the sink, same candle half burned on the counter, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It didn't feel like home. We ate in near silence. Small talk skimmed across the surface, weather, work, some story about a neighbor's dog. Layla didn't look up much. Mom talked like someone afraid to poke the wrong bruise. I let it happen. I didn't force connection. I didn't rescue the conversation. I let the awkwardness breathe. And when the pause came, long and hollow, I let that stay too. Finally, Mom looked at me and asked, "So, are you okay?" I could have said yes. Could have said, "I'm fine," and let it slide back into shallow water. But I didn't. I said, "I'm better now, but it wasn't easy getting here." She nodded slowly, then looked down at her plate. "You disappeared." I held her gaze. "No. I stopped giving." That landed heavier than I expected. For a moment, I thought she might deflect. Say something about stress or miscommunication or how I misunderstood. But she just sat there, breathing through it. Then Layla finally spoke. "We didn't ask you to take care of everything, you know." I turned to her calmly. "No, you didn't. You just let me, every time. And when I stopped, no one checked if I was okay. You just noticed the money wasn't coming anymore." She rolled her eyes slightly but didn't argue. And I realized then, I wasn't there to fix it. I wasn't there to be heard. I was there to stand. To sit through the silence and not shrink. To speak and not explain. It was the most powerful I'd ever felt in that room. After dinner, I helped clear the plates, not because I owed anyone, but because I wanted to leave things clean. When Mom walked me to the door, she paused. Her hand hovered like she wanted to reach for me but didn't know how. "I didn't know you were hurting," she said, quiet. I nodded. "That's because you never asked." She flinched a little but didn't argue. Didn't defend, just stood there. We said goodbye. No dramatic hugs. No promises to do better. Just the soft click of the door closing behind me as I stepped back into the cold. And it didn't crush me. It didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a chapter finishing, without the need for punctuation or applause. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need them to understand. I just needed to know I could walk into that house and not disappear. I got into my car, sat there for a minute, then pulled away with both hands steady on the wheel, because sometimes facing your past isn't about fixing anything. It's about proving to yourself that you don't live there anymore. The day after dinner at my mother's, I woke up to sunshine creeping across the floor. There were no texts from Layla, no missed calls from Mom, nothing passive-aggressive, nothing performative, just stillness. It felt strange. Like walking into a room you used to clean for everyone else and realizing you could just sit down. You didn't have to perform. You didn't have to serve. You could just be in it. I made tea. Sat in my new favorite spot, the chair by the window I used to ignore. It faced east. Got the morning light just right. The mug in my hand felt warm and weightless. And for once, I didn't start my day thinking about who I might need to rescue. I didn't check my bank app. Didn't glance at my email with that quiet dread, waiting to see what part of my life would be asked of me next. I just sat, and it was enough. The days that followed didn't become miraculous. I still had work, still had bills, still had that little voice that sometimes whispered, "Shouldn't you be doing more?" But it was quieter now, less demanding. Easier to sit beside without giving it the last word. I started walking in the evenings. No destination. No headphones, just me and the rhythm of my steps, the sound of leaves underfoot, the distant hum of other lives happening. I'd pass people on porches, in windows, behind cafe glass. And instead of feeling like I was missing something, I felt curious, open, like I was no longer outside of the world, but no longer obligated to carry it either. One night, I walked past a bakery that had just closed. The sign in the window still flickered. The display case was mostly empty, but there was one croissant left, sitting on a tray. I smiled, not because I wanted it, just because I could notice it without needing to do anything. That was new. So much of my life had been wrapped around action, around usefulness, around doing, fixing, explaining, earning. But now, I was learning the quiet art of being. I went to the bookstore again, not because I was sad, not because I needed distraction, just because I liked the sound the door made when it opened. I wandered for 30 minutes and didn't buy anything, didn't need to. The being there was enough. The barista at the cafe around the corner started remembering my name. Jake, who I hadn't seen since the tea and tools moment, passed me in the hallway one morning and said, "Hey, you look like you slept." I laughed because I had, and because someone noticing without wanting anything in return still felt like a small miracle. There was a softness returning to my life, not in grand gestures or perfect routines, but in the way I stopped bracing for someone else's crisis, in the way my shoulders didn't tense every time my phone buzzed, in the way I no longer rehearsed conversations in my head just in case someone accused me of being selfish. I wasn't trying to prove I was healed. I wasn't documenting my progress or measuring how far I'd come. I was just living, one quiet, ordinary day at a time. I deleted Layla's last message, not out of anger, out of release. I removed Mom from my favorites list, not to hurt her, just to stop pretending the line between us still needed to be urgent. I didn't announce it, didn't post it, didn't make a grand decision about what kind of daughter I was or wasn't anymore. I just made space, space to rest, space to want, space to figure out what I liked when no one was watching, space to not have all the answers. And in that space, something new began to grow. Not ambition, not romance, not some big goal to chase, just stillness. And with it, a kind of quiet strength I'd never had when I was the strong one. It's funny how many people will praise you for disappearing on behalf of others, for sacrificing, for being selfless, but no one teaches you how to return to yourself when the applause fades. I had spent years trying to prove I was okay. To my mother, my sister, my coworkers, even strangers who didn't know the full story but saw my calm face and thought, "She's got it together." But now, I wasn't proving anything. I was breathing, I was noticing. I was standing in my own life, no longer asking for permission to exist within it. And that felt like freedom, not the kind with fireworks or grand exits, but the kind that slips in on a Tuesday morning, when the light hits your floor just right, and you realize no one is holding you back anymore. It hit me while I was folding towels, not a profound epiphany. Just a slow, quiet noticing. The way the cotton felt warm from the dryer, the way my hands moved without urgency, the way the silence in my apartment no longer felt like punishment. I just put the last towel in the drawer when I stood up, turned toward the mirror on the hallway wall, and saw myself, not the version who used to stand here multitasking a dozen invisible duties, not the one scanning her phone for emergencies, just me, present, upright, breathing. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't see lack. I didn't see failure or distance or someone trying to be okay. I saw a woman who had been through hell quietly and returned softer, not harder. I walked over, leaned against the counter, let myself look, really look. I didn't look like the person I used to imagine I'd be at this age. I wasn't climbing some corporate ladder in heels that pinched. I wasn't holding a family together with spreadsheets and wire transfers and birthday cards no one remembered to return. But I was whole. Not flashy whole. Not Instagram caption whole, just standing in her own space and not shaking kind of whole. And I thought, maybe that's what strength actually looks like. Not control, not composure, but the willingness to stay when it gets quiet. The decision to keep choosing yourself when no one else is clapping. Later that day, I pulled out an old notebook, one I hadn't written in for years. It still had the pen loop and the coffee stain across the back. The last entry was from a year ago, and it read like someone writing from a place of exhaustion she didn't have the language for yet. I turned to a fresh page. No goals, no lists, no declarations of change, just one sentence. You did not disappear. You were just never seen clearly by people who didn't know how to look. I didn't write it for closure. I didn't plan to post it or fold it into some future memoir. I wrote it because it was true. I had spent years trying to earn presence, to be so helpful, so reliable, so constant that someone would finally say, "We see you." But they never did, not really. And now I understood that maybe they weren't capable of it. Maybe they were never supposed to be the ones who gave me that. Maybe it was mine to give. And I was giving it, not all at once, not in some big ritual, but in the dailiness of living. Choosing rest, cooking for one, lighting a candle without reason. Paying attention to things no one else would ever notice, and not needing them to. I used to think that becoming your own person meant becoming hard, sharp, unreachable. Like finally being tough enough to handle the world. But what I was learning was that real selfhood, the kind that doesn't shake when people leave, is incredibly soft. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand applause. It just stays. And I was still here, still waking up, still walking, still drinking lavender tea from the mug I bought on a day I thought I might break, still not answering Layla's message, still not checking to see if Mom had said anything to anyone. Still not explaining, not defending, just living. I tucked the notebook back on the shelf, sat down, let the sun fall across my lap like a kind of quiet blessing. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who ran herself into the ground trying to be good, trying to be indispensable. I didn't hate her, I didn't blame her, I just saw her now. And I whispered without drama, without tears, "You're allowed to rest now." She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because she already had. It started with a question I hadn't asked myself in years. Not, what do I need? Not, what should I do next? Just, what do I want? It came out of nowhere. One of those quiet mornings where the tea was still warm, the air still, the noise of the outside world still deciding whether it wanted to interrupt you. I was sitting by the window, journal open, and the pen moved before I could think. What do I want? I stared at the question like it belonged to someone else. For so long, everything I did was framed by what others needed, what I could offer, what I could manage, how I could fit into their chaos without taking up too much space. Wanting for myself had always felt indulgent, even selfish. But that morning, there was no one to answer to, so I wrote the first thing that came to mind. I want quiet mornings that belong only to me. Then another's line. I want a home that feels like mine, even when no one sees it. And another, I want to make something anything, without explaining why it matters. I kept writing. Small things, honest things, nothing too big or cinematic. Just what felt true in that moment. I want to walk slowly. I want to learn how to make bread. I want to buy fresh flowers just because. I want to be near water. I want a weekend that doesn't begin with catching up and end with regret. I want to belong to myself. I looked at the list when I finished and felt a quiet ache, not sadness exactly. More like the feeling of recognizing a part of yourself you thought was lost, but it had only been waiting. That afternoon, I looked up short retreats near the coast. I didn't book anything, didn't make a plan, just browsed, imagined, allowed the possibility to enter without immediately shutting it down with not practical or maybe someday. For once, maybe didn't feel like a delay. It felt like an invitation. I started pinning recipes. I read poetry without trying to interpret it. I bought a small bouquet of wildflowers from the grocery store and didn't apologize to myself for the price. And one night, while brushing my teeth, I caught my reflection and said out loud, "You're allowed to build something new now." The voice was steady. No audience, no performance, just truth. A few days later, I passed an empty storefront on a quiet street I didn't usually take. It had big windows, old wood floors, dust still clinging to the corners. The for lease sign was faded, peeling. But I stopped and stared at it longer than I meant to. Not because I had a plan, but because for the first time I could picture something, a space, a place to create, to welcome people, to host something small, simple, meaningful. I smiled. Kept walking, but something in me had opened. That night I wrote one more thing in my journal. I don't know what's next, but for once that doesn't scare me, it feels open. I used to think healing was about going back, restoring what was broken, fixing what went wrong, making peace with what hurt. But now I think maybe healing is what happens when you stop rebuilding the old structure and start planting seeds somewhere new. I haven't booked the retreat, haven't called the leasing agent, haven't mapped out the next 5 years, but I'm dreaming again. Not because I'm trying to escape my life, but because, finally, I'm beginning to believe I get to build one. And that changes everything. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I realized I hadn't thought about them in days. I was folding laundry, the same way I always do, slowly, neatly, one item at a time. Music was playing low in the background, something soft, mostly piano. The kind of song that doesn't ask for your attention, just makes space around you. Outside, the sky was clear but the light was muted, that late-day golden gray that always makes me feel still. And in that stillness, it just landed. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for a message, not for them to show up differently. I wasn't wondering if they missed me, or if they felt guilty, or if one day they'd understand what it cost me to always be the one who stayed, who paid, who carried. I wasn't rehearsing conversations in my head. I wasn't writing letters I'd never send. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just wasn't there anymore. And that felt like a kind of miracle. Because for so long, I believed I had to resolve everything. Tie it up. Find the perfect sentence that made it all make sense. But what I've learned is that healing rarely comes in a single, satisfying moment. Sometimes it comes on a Wednesday afternoon in silence, with your hands full of warm cotton and your heart surprisingly light. I made tea, sat by the window, watched 2 birds chase each other across the rooftops. I didn't think about what came next. I didn't plan. I didn't journal. I just breathed. I had nothing to prove. No performance to maintain. No version of myself to perform. No more emergency roles to fill. And I knew deep in that unshakable way that if they ever did call again, I wouldn't panic. I wouldn't scramble. I wouldn't bleed myself dry trying to be who they remembered. Because that girl was gone. And the woman who had taken her place. She didn't raise her voice to be heard. She didn't beg to be needed. She didn't explain her boundaries like a plea. She simply chose herself. Quietly. Repeatedly, without permission. I sat there long after the tea went cold. Not because I had nowhere else to be, but because I finally liked being with myself. No part of me wanted to escape. No part of me felt like I had to earn this moment. And maybe that's the real ending. Not a dramatic confrontation, not the perfect redemption arc,